Awesome. Hello, everyone. How are we doing? Good. I love it. It's so nice to see some familiar faces too. I mean, between Summit and calls that we've had, it is just great to see some familiar faces, even on Zoom. You know, I think about the day when we actually do meet in person, and it's like, I've only ever seen Caleb on a screen, and like, this is actually what Caleb looks like in person. That's just made such a good day. But thank you all so much for having me tonight. We are going to dive into virtual facilitation. And so when I was sitting here a couple minutes ago and hearing all about this hurricane that's coming through, right, that reminds me a lot of 2020. And we don't know what's coming around the pike, and there's a lot of uncertainty even this week within our state, and there's a lot that's on our plate, right? We have to worry about this hurricane and this conference that we have. And virtual facilitation is not a hurricane, but it can feel like it sometimes, and it can be really, really scary. And so our goal tonight is to help it be not so scary. We know there's going to be some uncertainty. We know there's going to be some challenges, but again, tonight is to help us feel more comfortable. Tonight, we're going to get a ton of information thrown at us. Has anyone been on any of these virtual facilitation workshops in the past couple weeks? I don't see, yeah, Megan, most of us haven't. Courtney and I have been doing them, so hopefully this will be all some helpful information. This is gonna help build your toolbox for facilitation. What I would suggest is I have a journal. I'm a big journal person. If you have some way to take some notes, I think that would be super helpful, because ideally you'll be applying this information as you write some workshops in the future. I'm also happy though to send some slides over to your state staff members too. So if you don't get everything, that's okay. But we are going to dive into facilitation. Again, this is going to be a ton of information all at once, and it's going to feel kind of like an informational session more than a workshop, and we'll get into why that is a little bit. Questions before we get going? We good? Feeling good? Okay. I'm going to play this bad boy. Okay, so this is Virtual Workshops 101. So this is tips and tricks from the road. You know, our team, we were trained in traditional facilitation, which is all well and good, but we know that didn't work quite well in 2020. So this is really the things that I have figured out trial and error. And I've made a lot of mistakes, and hopefully tonight we can help you all not make some of those same mistakes and learn them. We're gonna cover a bunch tonight. We have about an hour and a half. The first probably 40 minutes is gonna feel a lot like me just talking at you, but it's gonna help give you a ton of information. We're gonna have a chance to ask some questions at the end, talk through some scenarios, and then if we have time, we'll have a chance to actually apply all of this information. So hang tight. We're gonna cover all of this in this webinar thing we have going on right now. We're going to talk about direct lessons that I have learned from virtual workshops, big differences that we see between in-person and virtual, what the heck a workshop even is versus a webinar, examples of magic formula, virtual processing, platforms, how-tos, tips and tricks, Q&A, try-on activities. Hopefully we're going to do it all. If at any point, if y'all know me, you know I'm super chill. If you have questions, seriously interrupt me, and we are going to tackle this together. This is not just me, this is tackling it together. So we are going to talk about some direct lessons very first. Again, if you want to take some notes, this might be helpful. We know that COVID has taken away a whole lot of things, right? For a lot of us, it was our state convention. It was the moment that we were supposed to meet our team for the very first time at state convention. It was Summit, it's national convention, it's all of these things. It's this conference this week that COVID sometimes takes away. But the thing that I try to remember is that even though we've lost a lot of things, there's a lot of things that we haven't lost along the way. As state officers, y'all have the ability to make such an incredible difference in the lives of students. You are going to change some lives, and that is not going to change with COVID. COVID took away some of that in-person stuff, but it's not taken away that main ability to make a difference. And that always helps me when I was feeling kind of frustrated about maybe not being where I was supposed to be in person. We still get to be here tonight. Connecting virtually may not be ideal, but it's not impossible. I would even argue that sometimes it would be more ideal. You are going to be able to reach way more students virtually than you ever could have in person, and that is something that's really, really cool. Virtual facilitation is kind of scary, but it's not impossible. Which leads us in, it's not as scary as we think it is. How many of us, like show of hands, are kind of scared to facilitate virtually? Yeah, I know I was. I still am, and I've done it many times. We're going to take away some of that scary factor tonight. The small amount of time that we spend in our workshops can have a lasting impact on students. Think about the reason that you decided to run for state office in the first place. I would think that for a lot of us, it's because of a state officer that impacted us. I know for me, my reason was because I had a state officer that wrote me a note that said, "I believe in you." And that changed my life in ninth grade. The things that impact our students that state officers do aren't usually the things that are, on a stage or speaking in front of 20,000 people. That's all well and good, but it's those small moments. And we have these small moments virtually. We can still help students feel seen and feel valued and make that difference. And then one big thing that our team has really leaned into this year is that the method has changed, but not the mission. The reason that we're state officers, the reason that we're facilitating, the reason that we show up every single day is for our students. And that's the same regardless of if we spend the whole year virtual or not. So that's a good back pocket little guide. But again, these are just some direct lessons that we have learned this year that are really good to keep in the back of our mind as we're tackling facilitation. We're going to dive into what in the world is the difference between an in-person and a virtual workshop. For a lot of us, our in-person workshop experience may have been in a classroom. If a state officer came to our school, have any of us been in virtual workshops other than Summit? I know a couple of us have, right? Yeah, but we may not have as much experience with this. So the main difference right now is that in-person activities usually involve a lot of movement, a lot of directions. They're pretty complicated. I know I did this whole activity when I was facilitating in person, and we did like a try not to laugh challenge, and students were up on desks and all over the classroom. It was kind of a mess a lot of times. So they're typically pretty active and involved. A virtual workshop is going to be a little bit different in the fact that we're not going to use a lot of supplies and we're not going to move a whole lot. Our window into our students' world is this screen right here. Our students may be at home, they may be in the classroom, they may be in their car, you don't really know. We don't have as much space to utilize, so we have to be a little bit more creative. And we're going to talk about some methods that we can use to be creative with that. We're going to use what students have and enter into this little screen into their world. When we think about a visual aid with an in-person workshop, that's typically going to be in the form of a poster on a wall. Those really pretty posters that state officers usually make. Those are typically used, and supplies can be anything from tennis balls to index cards to sticky notes, you name it. I'm sure state officer has used it probably in a workshop. We have a joke that state officers and national officers just use everything they can find and figure out how to do the workshop around it. The visual aid aspect on a virtual workshop is going to be electronic. We can all think about Summit. It would be a really great example. You know how all of this stuff we did on Summit was on a PowerPoint slide for our small group? Yeah, usually instead of making an actual poster, we would do that on an electronic format. When I'm facilitating by myself, I usually make a PowerPoint just like this and then share my screen, and it's pretty successful. Classroom management from an in-person standpoint is a challenge. If we had more time, I would love to hear about some facilitation stories y'all have. It can be hard to go into a classroom sometimes and facilitate because a lot of times we have students that may not know what FFA is or what AG is, and that can be a challenge. The benefit of being virtual is that we can manage our participants a lot better. It's really, really hard if me and Lee were, wanting to have a side conversation about who knows what. It'd be really hard for the two of us to have that conversation, right? When we're in a Zoom platform. And so it helps with classroom management a lot of times. And it also helps us work with our students that may be having more difficulties, and we're going to get into what that actually looks like using Zoom in a little bit. So in-person workshops, a lot of times, at least how it worked in Virginia, and I'm assuming it did, or it does in your states, is that we'll get assigned a chapter visit and we'll go there, and you kind of don't know what kind of students you're going to have. A lot of times we'd be at a school for an entire day and you'd have general ed classes. So engagement was kind of hit or miss. Sometimes the officers would be super involved, but the other students wouldn't, and vice versa. Virtual workshops, the benefit of it is that a lot of times students want to be there and they desire to be there. I'm sure you're going to talk to your state staff about how y'all are going to handle chapter visits this year. You may get assigned a visit, and that's cool, but you may also have the chance to host some just open-ended workshops for any student that wants to be a part of it. And those are really cool because all of those students took that initiative to sign up and be a part of it. In person, a lot of times the time constraint restricts the ability to make a connection with our students. We might have a 45-minute window of time where we have 50 students that we have to facilitate to, and then they leave the classroom. When we are online, that time constraint does exist, but more students have the desire and the ability to make connections. I know that sometimes when I would do workshops, students would want to hang out for an hour after them, which is great if you have time as the facilitator to let them hang out for an hour. But I don't know about y'all, but COVID has really made me crave some human interactions. I'm a naturally extroverted person, but even if we're not, we want that human connection. And so any way we can get it is important for us. And so for our students, the ability to hop on a Zoom says a lot about them. And to me tonight, the ability or the fact that y'all are here says a lot about you too. And it's cool to make those connections. Okay, we're gonna dive into now what the heck a workshop versus a webinar is. Both of them have their place and their purpose. But when we talk about engaging students, we are typically going to lean one way or the other. So the easiest way before we dive into the specifics to think about this is a workshop is like we saw in Summit, or maybe you attended one of me or my teammates' workshops where you actually do activities and you head into breakout rooms and you work with other people. A webinar is more like a lecture. If you're in school right now and you're in online school, a webinar would be like logging on to a class and listening and being talked at, which is kind of funny because that's what we're doing right now. So we're going to talk about both of them because they do have a time and place. But again, workshops are kind of going to be more where we're going to head as state officers this year. Again, y'all, please stop me. I can talk fast, but it's a lot of information. Please let me know if you have questions. Workshops tend to be participant driven. Most of the talking is done by participants instead of the facilitator. This is why I love workshops, because students can take control of the workshop. Sometimes that can be a bad thing, but a lot of times it can be really, really good. A facilitator is helping get our students to a point, but it's less about the facilitator and more about the students. A webinar is facilitator driven. I am demonstrating what a webinar is tonight. It's not going to feel that fun and engaging because it's not supposed to. It is facilitator driven. I know exactly where I'm going to get y'all tonight. I know what my job is, and I'm going to talk at you for a while because we're in a webinar versus a workshop. A workshop, we engage our participants in a lot of different ways. This can be through activities, discussions, the options are very limitless with how we engage our students, but we want our students engaged. We know that it's super, super hard, right? To sit in front of a computer and be talked at. Maybe you're already tuning out, and that's okay. I don't blame you. But we want to keep our students engaged when we're delivering a workshop. When we are in a webinar, like tonight, we have a slide deck to get through. We have very little engagement. We don't get to talk to each other. I wish that we could talk to each other right now, but it's kind of awkward because this is exactly what you're experiencing. If you want to think of an example when you are creating a workshop, you don't necessarily want this style, right? We don't want to be talking at the screen and hoping our students are listening. We want to be engaging with them. When we think about a workshop, think about a workshop you've been in at some point in your life, whether that was in high school, middle school, or even this year. Usually at the end of that workshop, we have some type of takeaway, right? We want our students to walk away with something that they can use. Who can think of an example of a takeaway from Summit this past year?
Oh, hey, P. I don't know if you can see me or not, Tess.
Yep.
One takeaway that I got away from Summit this year was that advocacy is powerful,
Yep.
and that you should always strive to be a really good advocate for what you
Right.
believe in.
Yep. Awesome, Caleb. And y'all actually made advocacy plans, right? And so you thought about that. Very cool. So we want students to walk away knowing what they got out of it. Webinar is we're front loading. I'm providing you a ton of information tonight. It is totally up to you if you use this information or not. No one's going to check in if you don't. We're not going to have like a takeaway at the end to see. So it's totally up to participants. A webinar is great if you're working with state officers or maybe chapter officers where you can trust them to use that information. Chapter members, depending on the group, may want to take away so that we know what we're getting at. A workshop is going to create and foster autonomy. Your participants of the workshop are going to help drive where you go. As a facilitator, y'all are going to figure out that you're going to have an idea about where you're going to go. You're going to have a main point, but your participants are going to totally drive that conversation. A lot of times our students come up with answers that we never would have thought up as facilitators, and that's pretty cool. A webinar, a facilitator is directing the show. You are along for this ride tonight that we are in. Like it or not, you're strapped in. You're with me for the next hour and a half. I know exactly where we're going, know exactly on the pike. So it is me. A lot of experiential learning. We're going to talk about a model that we use to help our students that you may or may not be familiar with when you're learning how to facilitate. A webinar is more about information share and then an opportunity for Q&A at the end. Okay, 5-second stretch break. All right, maybe your college professors do this too, give you a stretch break or something. If I was a professor, I would do that, I feel like. Okay, we are going to talk about Kolbs. Who here has ever heard of Kolbs? Go ahead and throw a hand up. Yeah, a couple of us. So depending on, that's awesome. Depending on where we are in our facilitation journey, whether we've kind of gotten some facilitation coaching at this point or not, we may or may not know about Kolbs. So just in case this is new, we're going to talk about it right quick. The first thing, Kolbs is a cycle, but we typically start at the top where we have an experience. This is usually an activity that we do with our students to help lead them through something. It provides an experience for our students. The next stage we go to is the one in orange, and that's the reflection stage. That's when we're asking questions like, why in the world did we just build that tower during Summit? How did we feel about that? What was hard? What was easy? We start trying to make some sense of that experience. We go down at that point to the analysis page, and that, or the analysis stage, and that is, how can I apply what I just learned to my life? the best way for our students to buy into whatever we are helping them learn is to help them figure out how can it impact them. Why should they care about this? For y'all tonight, we're not really using Kolb's, but to answer this question, hopefully you're going to apply this when creating some workshops. Hopefully that's why you're here. Hopefully that's why you're here, instead of just being here for the ride. And then the last one is the application stage. That is using that information from all of the previous stages to actually apply it to your life. And then the cycle starts over. This is kind of abstract and conceptual, and I think well in examples. So I'm going to provide an example that may help us make more sense of Kolb's that we all experienced during Summit. Okay, we all had virtual legislative visits, right? We did like a legislative visit, awesome. So that would be the experience that we had during Summit. We met with our legislators on Zoom, and we had that conversation that we had been preparing for during Summit. The reflection stage came during small group that evening. If y'all remember that night, we went into small group and then we headed into breakout rooms and talked about those legislative visits, right? What went well, what didn't go so well, what we could improve on for next time. That work in small group that we had was very purposeful, and that was the reflection stage of Kolb's after that experience. The analysis stage is everything that has happened since Summit. So that is when we have Katie thinking about, why did it matter that I went to that legislative visit? How can I use this in the future? It's that work of continuing to make sense of it and bringing it into Katie's world, and Katie's world as a state officer. And then the last stage of application would be the next time y'all do a legislative visit. That would be saying, okay, this went well, this didn't go well, this is why it's important to me, we're gonna do it again. And then do y'all see how we go to the experience, and then the stage continues, and then we would reflect and analyze and apply, and it would keep going so that we can be successful. That's exactly what Kolb's is, and we can do that exact same thing with all of our students when we're facilitating. Great thing to keep in the back of your mind. Okay, now we have this thing called the magic formula. Y'all know what the magic formula is? Anyone? No? Yeah, kind of. Okay. The magic formula has a very love-hate relationship with a lot of state officers. It is the way that we write a workshop. And so if you haven't already been trained on facilitation training, you are going to get some magic formula in your life very soon. And it's going through all of the steps of writing a workshop. But don't worry, if you haven't heard of it yet, we're going to talk about it now, and then you can be way more prepared for facilitation whenever it does come for you. So the very, very, very first thing we do in every single workshop is a connection. It is when we open the workshop and we hook the audience in a way that makes them want to engage and participate. One thing, or one example of this that I used during my virtual workshop this year was I had students DM a picture of their favorite hero to people in our workshop. And so they got on their Instagram, they looked up their favorite hero, and then they sent some DMs. You know, that at its surface seems just like a fun activity, but the point of it was to help students feel more comfortable with the other people in the workshop, to use Instagram, which everyone's really familiar with, and have a good starting point because our workshop was all about heroes. So it's just a way to help our students not feel so scared when they log on to Zoom and help them feel at ease with the facilitator. This can be anything from an online game that you had them complete, you know, a chat, a picture, a slide, a video clip, literally can be anything. Usually not too deep, usually more fun. It does have a purpose, but it's just to help students, again, feel comfortable pretty quick at the beginning. Then we head into the support. The support is like the meat and potatoes of a workshop. The support is any kind of activity that you do during a workshop. And so this could be building the tower, that we all did at Summit. It was watching that perspectives video that we did. It is where the content really comes to play of the support. Again, it can be pretty much anything you think of, video clip, personality tests, questions, answers, all of that good stuff. The point of it, though, is it's some type of experience that our students will engage in to get them to the main point of that objective. And then the last thing is an application. That is when we actually apply what we have learned to our students' lives. A lot of times we'll do this through a social media post, a TikTok, a Kahoot, some independent questions and answers. It can be anything. For me, what I usually do, I actually just wrote a new workshop today. And so my new workshop has a lot of activities. One of my supports, if you're looking at this, actually I can just walk you through it. The Connection is a game where students will vote on if a song is a good song or a bad song after hearing only 15 seconds of the song. So super fun. Everyone knows these songs. Just a quick little activity. Then we head into a support, and one of my supports is a scavenger hunt that students have to find 100 items within a team in only 5 minutes. So it's pretty active, pretty engaged, and they work with their team to do that experience. After the support, you typically will process, and the point of that support is that we have to support other people and work with other people to be successful. And then the application of that activity is to identify someone in their lives that they can support and what support looks like for them on a sticky note. So super easy, but do y'all see how like Connection's usually fun, not too serious. Support is more of an actual experience activity, and then an application is taking that support and applying it to life. You're gonna get more magic formula as you get more facilitation training. After we do a support, we head into this beast that is processing. Okay, processing is, I don't know what it is. It is difficult. I think it's the hardest part of any kind of workshop, but it's also sometimes the coolest part of any workshop. And so we're going to go through 4 different methods to process right now. And these are 4 really, really good methods. I would definitely write this slide down if you are taking notes. This is going to help. In processing is all about landing the plane. And so we're up here, we're flying high, we're doing a scavenger hunt, all as well. But then it's like, Tess, why the heck did we just spend 10 minutes gathering all of these items? What in the world was that? Processing is how we land that plane. So up here, we're playing a game, we're doing an experience. Processing, we're landing the plane and saying, okay, the point of that experience was to learn how to commit to a team. So processing is helping us get that jump. It is a super, super important stage of facilitation. 4 methods: facilitator front loading, question and answer, participant driven, and independent reflection. All of these have a time and place. One is not better than the other. We're going to go over all 4 of them. Pick your poison, choose which one you like, choose all of them, doesn't matter. Facilitator front loading is when we put, as a facilitator, everything that students should know on a slide, and students will write it down after we verbalize it. And so for my scavenger hunt example, this might be putting, we in this activity had to divide up those items we had to find. We had to work with our team. To be the most successful, we had to commit to our team and stay on track. And everyone had to do their part. That all would be on a slide. I would literally say it and students would get that point from that activity. That is facilitator front loading. That is your, that's probably the most responsibility on you as a facilitator, because you literally provide all of the information and students just kind of listen to it. Q&A is very traditional. If you have been in a workshop, chances are the facilitator used Q&A processing to get you where they were going. An example of this for my scavenger hunt, I would say, okay, what was the most difficult part of this activity? Or what did teamwork look like during this activity? Why was teamwork important? How can we be a good teammate? All those questions that our facilitators ask us to to get that information out, that is Q&A. Again, you probably have seen it from other facilitators. Q&A is Q&A. You ask questions, students answer. You can be creative though on a virtual format and use things like poll everywhere. If you want, you can use the chat. You can use the raise hand feature for students if you want to verbally answer questions. It's totally up to you as a facilitator. But again, you'll ask a question, students will answer. You'll use that answer to ask a new question, and so on until you get to that main point. Participant-driven processing is something that I think is really, really cool. And I wish I knew about this as a state officer when I was developing my workshop. That is when we put students at the front of our workshop. That is when we let students drive that bus. It is saying, if we did our scavenger hunt example, we would say, okay, we're going to head into some breakout rooms. We will have a conversation with people in these breakout rooms for 5 minutes about what just happened and why it matters. That's it. You send them to the breakout rooms. They come back after 5 minutes and some really cool information is going to come about. That's when you let students kind of drive that conversation about what that experience meant and why they think it's important. It was really cool. And then the last one is independent reflection. I usually try to find at least one example of this during my workshops. We know that some of our students work better individually, and that's totally okay. For me, when I'm thinking about something kind of deep, I like to journal about it and then talk about it. I don't want to just be asked to share my thoughts immediately. And so by having some independent reflection time, that gives the students that need that time to think a little bit more time and doesn't put them on the spot as much. This can be through doing a journal prompt on the screen. It can be through asking a question and having students just sit and think about it while you play some music. One place that this is very helpful is if you are getting to something that's kind of heavy or sensitive during your workshop, which I would encourage you to do. You have the ability you have a platform, you have the ability to impact some students. And so if on your heart you feel like you need to talk about something that's kind of heavy, do it, but respect your students and know that not every student is going to want to talk about what's heavy in their life, and that's totally okay. No one should force them to do that, especially not through a computer. And so whenever I get kind of heavy in my workshops, I always throw it to independent journal and allow students to kind of formulate their answers about whatever that question is, but not be asked to share it in front of 50 strangers or even online out loud to a state officer or national officer they don't really even know. So all 4 of these have a place, they all have a time, they all have a purpose. One is not better than the other. Use as many as you want during a workshop. Uses only 1 or 2, that's okay. But just think about what is the end goal of that conversation that you want to have. How are you going to land that plane? And the most successful method of landing that plane may be independent journal, but it may not be. And so having all of these in your toolbox is going to be very helpful when thinking about landing that plane. All right, y'all, we are going to talk real quick about some different platforms that you may find helpful as you are developing these workshops. Depending on what your state staff wants, they may ask you to use one instead of another. But we're just going to cover a couple of them tonight in case you want to use some and explore some independently. The first one, the one that I am the most familiar with, my favorite, is Zoom. It's the one that National FFA is using. So there's 2 different methods of Zoom. The first is Zoom free. That is the one that I had before National Office because I didn't want to pay money for mine. And so I got Zoom free. Any one of us can go do it. Super easy. You can have 100 participants in Zoom free. The kicker with Zoom free is that you have 40 minutes to facilitate. I will tell you right now from personal experience, that is not a lot of time. So it works well if you just want to have a quick conversation. I usually use my Zoom free if I want to catch up with a friend that doesn't have FaceTime. I use Zoom free because it's usually not going to be more than 40 minutes. Workshops, I would encourage you to really think about it, but you hit 40 minutes and it kicks everyone out. You can always restart the meeting, but at that point you have lost student engagement, so it's kind of a challenge. But you can use a lot of features like backgrounds, waiting rooms, breakout rooms, whiteboards, a lot of cool stuff. So honestly, I would encourage you, if you don't know a lot about Zoom, go ahead and sign up for a free version. They don't email you a lot or anything like that, and play around with it. 40 minutes though is the kicker. So to solve that, we go to Zoom Pro, which is what National FFA provides for us. That's what we use all of our workshops on. And it's also maybe what state staff is going to provide for y'all. I know in Virginia, all of our state officers have an account. It's about $15 a month. You can have 100 students on that workshop. The time length is 24 hours. So if y'all wanted to hang out for 24 hours, we could totally do it on Zoom. It's not going to kick you out. The big thing besides the time, which is why I think National FA likes this one, is that Pro is going to give you a lot more security and admin controls, which we're going to get into how to take advantage of those. But from a safety standpoint, Zoom Pro has a lot of features that are very good. Google Hangouts is one that a lot of our chapters do. I know I was on a couple chapter meetings that utilize Google Hangouts. It's free. You can have 10 is what the website says, but I've been on some that have more than 10. You don't have a time limit, but it's kind of more like a FaceTime call. And so you can use emojis and GIFs. You can mute people, but it's not as much like share your screen kind of stuff. At least I haven't figured out how it is. The last two I haven't used, but I wanted to provide that information for you because some people love them. GoToMeeting is free for 30 days, but you don't have to auto enroll. So if you want to just go sign up for it tonight and check it out, I think that'd be really cool. You can have 150 participants. So if 100 doesn't seem like quite enough, go for GoToMeeting, and then you'd pay after the free trial. You have a lot of cool things like unlimited cloud space, which Zoom does not have. So that's kind of a challenge sometimes. Slide to PDF, drawing, keyboard and mouse. It can be kind of cool. But again, I have not used that one, so I can't speak to how it is for facilitating. And then the last one is join.me. It's $20. It can have 250 people, which is really, really cool. And you can do a lot of really cool things like that. Like showing live videos, but I don't have experience with that, so I wouldn't feel comfortable telling you how it is to facilitate. For me, my favorite is Zoom Pro, but find what works for you. Don't just go to Zoom because you feel like that's the only option. There's other options available for you. We are going to talk about Zoom because Zoom is my favorite and Zoom is most likely what y'all are going to be using at some point this year. This is going to be more how-to and informative, so it's going to be helpful when you're actually trying to facilitate a workshop. So, couple features we're going to talk about. Again, I can email these slides, so you don't have to like draw these things or take a picture. This black bar that we see at the top is what it looks like if you are the host. So if you're the host of a meeting, it looks different than a participant, which is super important. And so for me tonight, when I logged on, I asked if I could be the co-host of the meeting because I needed to use some of these features. If you are facilitating and a chapter has made a Zoom and you just log on, make sure you ask to be the host, otherwise you're not gonna be able to do this stuff. When we talk about sharing things, sharing a PowerPoint, sharing video, audio, we want to use the share screen button, which is going to be at the bottom. It is green. You can click on it and then click on the little up arrow, and that will pull up a menu that is the white box. That'll have a whole lot of options for you, like a whiteboard, PowerPoints, any of that kind of stuff. The most important thing to learn, which I did not know at the very first time I facilitated, was y'all see at the very bottom of that white box, those little check boxes that say share computer sound, optimize screen for video clip. Y'all see that at the very bottom? Those are important to check. It's just going to make sure if you're sharing a video, especially, it comes through really well. But sharing your screen is as easy as hitting the share screen button. Breakout rooms are awesome. I love breakout rooms. I'm sure y'all loved breakout rooms during Summit. I know that most people did. It's the ability to have smaller conversations as students, and it helps our students feel very comfortable what breakout rooms are going to look like from a facilitator or host end is we'll see a button at the bottom of the screen in that black bar that says breakout rooms. We can click that button, and then what's going to happen is you can choose how many rooms you would like to break people into. So 4, 10, 20, whatever it is. And then you can break people automatically or manually. So usually for me, when I was facilitating, I didn't know a lot of the students. So I didn't really care, who was in what breakout room. So the way I would do this is I would know approximately I wanted 5 people in a breakout room. And so you just hit the little breakout room number, and then at the bottom where it says 0 participants, it tells you like you would have 5 people in each breakout room. And then you hit automatic, it's a random breakout room, and then you hit create rooms, and that's as easy as that. The manual one is good if you have specific students that you want specific places. So during Summit, do y'all remember the very first day there was like a list of everyone in each breakout room that was on the slides, and it was like Caleb's on room 1 and then Anna's in room 2. That was manually done, and so you as a facilitator have to go through and assign every single person a breakout room, which is good again if you have a specific purpose for having people in certain rooms. Usually though, I would hit automatic. You hit create rooms, people get an invitation, they go to breakout rooms. It's super cool, love it. One thing that is great from a safety standpoint is this guy called the waiting room. Zoom is very uncomfy. I feel like I am an awkward person, and Zoom amplifies that a lot of time, right? You have awkward Zoom silences. You have moments when 15 people try to talk at once. It can get very uncomfortable. And so the waiting room is a chance for you as a facilitator to avoid some of that uncomfiness at the beginning. What's going to happen is people will join, and you saw it tonight because this meeting had one enabled, and it'll be like, please wait, the host will let you in soon. You're just in a waiting room. That's all that means. And so from a facilitator end, I can see every single person that is in my waiting room and admit them individually or admit them all at once. What I would do as a facilitator typically is have students have the link to Zoom, and then 2 minutes before I started, admit everyone. There are some students that want to get on 45 minutes before a workshop just because they want to talk to you. That's great, but you also need a chance to catch your breath as a facilitator, so don't feel like you have to let them in 45 minutes early. Keep them in the waiting room, let them chill out a little bit, and then admit everyone at once. One really cool thing about this is the safety feature of this. And so as a facilitator, you can send a chat to everyone in the waiting room. And so you can say, hey, everyone, like, we're going to let you in soon. One thing I used for this is National FFA required us to have people sign up ahead of time for our workshops and then have a list of students. What I would do is make sure the students who signed up for my workshop were in the waiting room on the list. If I saw Caleb signed up and was in the waiting room, I would let him in. If I saw iPhone 5735, I would not let I-5135 into my workshop because they had not registered for it, because we don't know who that person is, right? So we don't want Zoom bombers in our workshops, and so this is a really great way to not admit everyone. One thing I would caution you on is sometimes students have to use their parents' account, or their thing comes in as iPhone, and so you can send a message to everyone in the waiting room and say, hey y'all, like, we're gonna start in a couple minutes, please make sure your name is your first and last name, and then students can change it, and then you can let them in if you have to keep track of it. And then if they still don't change it from iPhone, I would just let those students be in the waiting room for the whole time, because it just wasn't fair to those students in there to have that kind of risk. So it's a really cool feature to make sure that the right people are actually in your workshop. The whiteboard is something we use during Summit. I love it. You're going to go to share screen, kind of like we saw a couple of slides ago. Here, I'll go back for you. Okay, share screen right here where it's circled. You're going to get a menu that looks like the white box on the left. It'll say whiteboard. You click on it, and then everyone can add to the whiteboard. Super cool. They can text, or they can put text, they can draw. They can put whatever they want. As the host, you do have the ability to move comments and delete comments. So super cool. if you need to delete something because it's not on topic or whatever that may be. Whiteboard's really, really cool. When we talked about classroom management and Zoom helping out with that a little bit ago, that's where this comes in. So we can manage our students, but in a very different way. You know, sometimes it would be nice to mute a student, maybe if you were facilitating to them in person, if they're kind of off topic or whatever, but we can't do that in person, obviously, but we can do that on Zoom. So say you have a student, you don't want to mute them if they're just talking, but say you have a student that forgets to cut their mic off and they have a dog barking in the back or their mom's yelling at them. You'd be surprised how much stuff you see when you facilitate it on Zoom enough. You can mute them. So you don't have a lot of background noise. I typically mute everyone at the beginning and then students can unmute themselves. Also a safety feature though, say you have someone on there and they just want to go off about something, just mute them. If it's going to be detrimental to your workshop, you have that ability to do that. Another thing you can do is if you see on the right hand side, if you click on the participant, you have this whole menu that pops up if you're the host. You can chat with them privately. So say a student needs to get out of your workshop because they have to go to work. They can always send you a message and you can send them a message back. You also have the ability to stop a video. If something bad's happening, stop the video. You can make them a host or a co-host if you are with maybe one of your teammates. I wouldn't do that with a student, but say that you are facilitating with someone, you can make them a co-host. You can rename someone if someone doesn't want to rename themselves because it's bad, you can rename them. You can also throw them in the waiting room if you need to. So we don't like to talk about, you know, students misbehaving, but from a facilitator standpoint, this is really important for y'all to know because we want to protect our students. And so if you have someone that's not being appropriate in a workshop, this is where that comes into play, and it's a really good feature to just know, just in case. We'd rather you know now than when it's too late. One big thing is when you go to Zoom and you create a meeting for your workshop, you want to make sure certain things are enabled. One of those things is a waiting room, which we talked about, and the other is breakout rooms. I have made the mistake of creating a meeting, but not enabling these settings, and then guess what happens? You get to your workshop, you start your Zoom meeting, and once that meeting is started, you cannot enable these things, and so you don't have them. And I had an activity where students used breakout rooms, and I forgot to do it, so we did not have breakout rooms for that meeting, which was okay, but you know, it requires some problem solving on this spot. And so what you want to do is once you get your Zoom account, you're going to go to the left and hit settings, and you're just going to go ahead and toggle on waiting room and breakout room. I have them on now all the time for me. Once you do them once, you don't have to do them again, and then you don't have to worry about not having those features. One thing I would be mindful of is if you're facilitating to a class and they create the room for you and the Zoom link for you, that's great. But if they have not enabled these features, you might not have them. And so you might want to have a backup plan, or even when you're making the initial contact with the teacher, say, hey, like I really will need some breakout rooms. Can you make sure those are enabled under settings? You're just asking for what you need, but have a backup plan if you are jumping on a Zoom. Okay, y'all, that is a ton of information. We are getting there, I promise. Before we end though and have a chance for some Q&A, we're gonna go over some general tips and tricks that I have learned through trial and error and through mistake. So when we are facilitating online, we do not want complex supplies. We are going to think when we're making our supply lists and even making these workshops, whenever that may be, of supplies that students are probably going to have at their home. You know, depending on the state of the student and if they can go to school or not, some students may not be able to go to the grocery store and pick up some supplies or go to Walmart and get some things. They may not have that ability. And so we want to think through supplies that our students are most likely going to have. So this doesn't, you know, you wouldn't want to say you need 2 pink bouncy balls. That's super random. Like, probably not going to have it. So think of supplies you want. I've had students join workshops from vehicles before, from schools, from offices, from coffee shops, from literally everywhere. So think about that when you're thinking of supplies. One very helpful pro tip I would share with you tonight is that it's always good to have a backup plan. And so one of my workshops, the one I just wrote actually, we have an activity where students write something down on a sticky note, but I have a note for myself that if students don't have a sticky note, to open the notes page on their phone and type it out. So always good to have options. Always provide a supply list before your workshop. So I would, when I sent the contact email for my workshops, I would send the Zoom information and then say students will need an index card and a sticky note. And so they know ahead of time so they don't have to be blindsided all of a sudden and try to find those items. Safety. Do not, under any circumstances, ever post a workshop link publicly. Ever, 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 ever. Do not do it. The way that we used it, which might, you can figure out with state staff what y'all want to do. The way National FFA does it is we have a Google form. So if you ever seen any of our Instagrams, you can click on the Jot form and it populates a Google form. And then you can enter your name and your email and all of that. And then from that information, I would send a individual email to all of those students. So only the students that have registered got the Zoom information. So it was never publicly posted. You don't want to do that because anyone can get on it and it's not very safe for our students to do that. So figure out the method to pre-register, but definitely avoid posting it if you can. If you want to use music, I highly encourage you to. I think it's kind of awkward sometimes to just sit there and have students journaling and not have some music. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have Spotify or whatever you use pulled up ahead of time, have your playlist up. And then when you hit share screen, that button, there's an option for share computer sound. That's what you're going to want to hit. I can back it up just so y'all see what I'm talking about. Okay, so if we go to this slide, you see share screen. Under the advanced, so there's the basic tab that is open. Under advanced, the one right beside that, click on that, and then there's a button that says share computer sound, and it's as easy as that. You can also, if that's complicated, share the actual screen and then just have Spotify minimized too. But definitely use music to your advantage. I think it's really important. If you want to get all fancy with it and you're tech savvy, go ahead and hook up, you can hook up the Spare TV with an HDMI cable and have another monitor going to keep yourself on track. This is not something that I did personally because I'm not that tech savvy, but it is something we use during Summit. And so if you can imagine Summit, we had the computer the facilitator was on, the computer your staff was on, and then 2 other computers in the back, all at that one station. And so if you want to try this out, definitely do it. It's really, really cool and it might help you out a lot. One thing that I think would be very helpful for all of us when we're first starting to facilitate especially is it is always okay and encouraged if your state staff's cool with it to have a teammate join on to your workshop. And the cool thing about having a teammate on the workshop is that you can have them serve in kind of a producer type role. So say that me and Sadie are teammates. We could both hop on and I'm the facilitator. So my job is to process and to do directions, all of that good stuff. Sadie can be someone that is putting students in breakout rooms or is managing the chat or is changing the slide, all of that behind the scenes stuff. So that as a facilitator, I only have to worry about literally facilitating and not all the tech stuff. I think this would be very, very helpful the first couple of times you're facilitating if you have the opportunity to, because then both of you can tackle this at once. And then the other cool thing is that you can learn from your teammates and your teammates can learn from you as well. So if you have the ability to hop on a teammate Zoom call, do it. I think it'd be really cool. And then also use the power of social media to your advantage this year. Social media is our best friend in quarantine, in 2020, in life, we know that. And we can use social media for good. We can start a hashtag, a movement, do a tangible takeaway for my workshop that I just wrote. I'm going to have students take a 15-second video of themselves saying something they're committing to and post it on their story. And then if you use a hashtag, you as a facilitator can catch a lot of that stuff and repost it, which is a really cool way to build rapport with your students and continue that relationship. So social media is always a good idea. Okay. There's a couple different methods of visual aids. You know, we want to share our screen and we want to share PowerPoints because that's how we're going to share a lot of information, but then you can't always see a lot of students. So right now for me, I can literally only see 4 people. And so y'all could be having a dance party for all I know, I don't know. And so it does have some unique challenges. A couple of ways around this. You can always use virtual backgrounds, which we did in Summit. You can have students change their background to something purposeful. So it can be, you know, put yourself in your happy place or a color to describe how you're feeling. Anything that you want. A virtual background is really cool, and then students can have that kind of control. You can always share a video. TikTok we know is huge right now, and so if there's a TikTok that relates to what you're doing, you can share it. During my workshop at Summit, we shared fail videos, just funny things you can do as long as they have a purpose. It's always fun to do to kind of break up the talking a lot. There is an add-on to Google Slides. It's called Pure Slide Deck. I have not used it, but I really am looking into it, and I'm going to explore it for my new workshop because the way I understand it is that students can literally interact with their slides and move things and comment kind of like a whiteboard, but on Google Slides. So I think that'd be really cool. Definitely, I'm checking that out. So if you want to do that too. And then Whiteboard is a good one too. You can maintain control as the host, but have students interact with each other. And then annotation is when students would draw on the screen and add to the screen, which is a really cool feature of Zoom. So tons of ways to visually engage with our students. All right, to finish this up from this, the webinar part of this, we're gonna talk about some real truths. These are just things that straight up we have learned and hold true. Your workshop, when you facilitate online, is not going to look, feel, you know, act like the workshop in person. That is okay. To be honest with y'all, I fell into the trap over when we were home, and I was like, oh, I'm just getting on a Zoom workshop, like no big deal, but it is a big deal. You need to remember that just because you're doing something virtually doesn't make it any less important and any less potentially impactful for those students. So never feel like, you know, this conference even is not as important as it would have been in the previous years. That's so not true. It just feels very, very different, but it's still very important and very impactful. Sometimes, or not sometimes, I'll straight up say, it a lot of times feels like you're connecting with students a lot less virtually. I'm someone that feeds off of energy, and I feed off of real interactions. It is just about killing me to not be able to do that this year. And it's hard sometimes when we're facilitating on Zoom and you can't read people's body language and you don't see their faces and you don't know if anything that you're saying is even landing. It can be tough. But remember, sometimes we are connecting with students even more. Our students are craving interactions. You know, that doesn't mean that they only are craving physical interactions. They're craving any kind of interaction. So always remember that even if you don't feel like you're making a connection, you may actually be, and that makes it really important that we're very mindful of the way we're facilitating in that time. No one, absolutely no one, is expecting you to be perfect at using technology, flawless at processing, and always blowing people's mind. People are expecting you, and I think I can speak on behalf of state staff, they're expecting you to prepare. There are going to be times that processing doesn't land. You know, you are up here in the plane and then you crash the plane, and that's okay. You know, it happens to all of us. There are times when you forget to enable a breakout room and then you have to change on the spot. That is okay. Just because it is virtual, though, does not mean that we cannot prepare. We have to prepare ahead of time, and sometimes prepare a lot more. It's always a good idea to jump on Zoom a little bit ahead of time and make sure you understand how to use that technology. But if there's a glitch, go with it. It's not the end of the world, and a lot of times our students are not going to know if our direction set was perfect or processing was perfect. They're going to know if we took the time to prepare, and they really, really just care that you make them feel seen and valued. And so don't get so caught up in the technicalities. This is beyond workshops. This is for state office in general. Our year of service is always about them. It is not about us. I know I fell into the trap a couple times of being like, why me? Like, why did I work this hard, you know? And then this happened. That's okay. Those are very relevant feelings, and maybe you felt that too. But the thing is, it's not about us. We were given this year to serve people around us, and we can still serve our students. And our students need us now more than ever to step up for them and be there for them, and we can still do that. If you buy into this workshop, they will too. If you were in my workshop at Summit, you saw me dancing like a crazy person to a song, and I was having a dance party by myself. But that's okay, because what that does is it allows our students to see that we are excited to be there. That dance party was not just because I felt like making a fool of myself. No, that was because I was genuinely excited to spend some time with those students. And so if you bring energy and excitement and you act like you want to be there, students will too. If you act like you don't want to be there and you'd rather be there in person and you are pounding through it, students are going to pick up on that, and they will be too. And so always, students mirror how we present ourselves, so always keep that in mind. No one has a clue what they are doing. It is 2020, for goodness sake. We don't know what's going to happen. Aliens could come, and it wouldn't surprise me. It is okay. Comparison is always the thief of joy. We are on a team with other people. It is natural to want to compare ourselves to those people. We may say, oh, Sadie is the queen at processing, and Anna is the queen at technology. That's okay, but we shouldn't ever compare ourselves. We can learn from our teammates. We're on a team for a reason, because we bring unique gifts and talents. One more way I would take comparison is that we are having a very different state office year than people have in the past. It is very easy to want to compare our state officer year this year to past years. Very natural to do that. But just know you weren't meant to be a state officer 5 years ago or even a year ago. You were meant to be a state officer this year. And so it's very easy to get caught in that trap of comparison of what it could have been, but know that this is a unique gift and an opportunity to serve. And so just be mindful of that. We're going to talk about some questions. I have a couple questions, but before we get into that, I think it'd be more relevant to hear what kind of questions y'all are having at this point. We had a ton of information thrown at us, and so these are going to be questions about maybe what's worked, what hasn't worked, tips and tricks, really anything. Now is your chance to ask those questions. So please, if you would like, unmute yourself, ask away. I guarantee you other people are thinking about it, and let's tackle some of these questions.
Hey Tess, I have one.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a preferred platform for different size groups that you use? Like, do you like to switch around? I know you said you like Zoom Pro.
Yep.
If you're using like different size groups, do you switch around?
That's a great question, Sadie. For me, I'm always a Zoom kind of person. And so I've had workshops with only 2 students in them, and I still use Zoom just because I'm the most familiar with all of that technology. But, you know, Google Hangouts is one that's more like a FaceTime. So maybe if you were just doing like a conversation with some chapter officers, you could utilize Zoom, Google Hangouts. But I use Zoom, and I found it works even for like a one-on-one conversation up to 100 people.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey Tess, so
Hey.
back to the processing. I saw
Yep.
something on one of your slides. It said personal inventory assessment. Can you elaborate on that?
Personal inventory assessment. Let me go back to that slide, Caleb, so we all know what we're talking about, okay? Great question. All right. Point me to where you see that. I know what you're talking about. I'm just trying to find it.
Yeah, it's under independent reflection.
Okay. Personal inventory assessment. Okay, y'all, it's the second bullet point under independent reflection. Thanks, Caleb, for helping me get there. And so this may be if you have a question that leads to some reflection from a student standpoint of taking an inventory of where they are at the current moment in your workshop. And so this may be like having students, you answered a question and then taking an inventory of like, what am I feeling? What am I still unclear about? What do I still need some more information about? It's helping students kind of check in with themselves to ask some questions to later reflect on by the end of the workshop. Does that help? That one's not used as often, but I would use it more like if you're at maybe you're training like a state officer or a chapter officer team, you might have them take a personal inventory at the beginning of all of their fears of virtual facilitation, say we could have used tonight. And then by the end of the workshop, if those questions weren't answered and those fears weren't addressed, we could come back to them during a Q&A. Does that help? Good?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah.
So it's like when the teachers use like the red light, yellow light, green light. That kind of thing?
Probably, Megan. I'm not familiar with that, but I would assume so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Great questions, y'all. What else?
Okay, Tess, I'm just curious. So, have you ever used like visual aids like in your room or wherever you're facilitating, like behind you on the wall or something?
Good question. Like a poster, like some kind of like object or something.
Yeah.
I have not at least used posters because this is like a super clean space because this is our apartment in Indy, but like my bedroom at home I share with my sister, and so like I didn't have a lot of space that was just my space that I could have hung up stuff, so maybe that would be different if I did. The way I will use a visual aid is like if I have students write something on a sticky note, like I have right here, I might write it, and then one of our activities we crumpled up the sticky note, so I'll be like, we're gonna crumple up the sticky note and throw it aside. So like that kind of thing. But typically not in the poster realm because I feel like it'd be hard to see sometimes.
Okay.
But that's just a personal thing. Good question. If you find a way to overcome that, let me know. Seriously.
If I'm not mistaken, I think Zoom flips it anyway, so you'd have to write everything backwards.
Ugh, that'd be even worse for my handwriting. That would not be good.
Hey, Katie, you can decide whether you flip it or not, like when you're choosing like reflect camera, or I'm not really sure the exact name of the setting, but when you go to like your video settings, you should be able to choose flip actions, reflect. I think it's that one.
Wow, that's awesome, Sadie. I did not know that. Learning something from you. That's so cool. What other questions do we have, y'all?
I have another one. So like, I know going into like leadership camp and a bunch of other workshops in the past, state officers have always kind of like set the tone, I guess, before we walk in the room.
Yeah.
So how do you do that with a virtual format?
Yeah, great question, right? Like you dictate the energy of that. The way that I do that in my Zoom workshops is to have music playing when students come in, typically pretty upbeat music, and they can dance along to it. But usually I try to keep it pretty casual and chill because I know it can be kind of intimidating to hop onto a Zoom, especially with people you don't know. And so I feel like as a student, if you hop on and there's some music playing and people are just like chilling out and talking to each other, that helps create that kind of welcoming environment that you want. And so that's the way I've done it. I would say also though, Caleb, you could always ask questions to students and try to initiate some conversation. Always helpful. Great question. Awesome. Lee, thank you so much. Lee just dropped in the chat kind of the tutorial for how to flip the camera. That's so cool.
Hey, Tess, I do have a question.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned earlier to avoid complex supplies
Yep.
or anything that a member would have to go buy.
Mhm.
So can you give us some examples of supplies that are household items that most students would have?
Totally. The ones I always leaned on were pieces of plain paper, notebook paper, you know, copy paper, pen, pencil, sticky notes, index cards. And then the other kind of like kind of random supply I would use is a plastic grocery bag, because I had an activity where students would like run around their house and pack this grocery bag. So just think about stuff in your house. And I would say the biggest thing from that is that I very rarely have students that didn't have all of those items but always have a backup plan. So say they don't have a plastic grocery bag at home, just use your hands, you know. But I would say index cards, sticky notes, that kind of stuff's a pretty safe bet. Always tell them in advance though. Great question, Elizabeth. Yeah, Megan.
Okay, so I know in our state, like all the different districts like have different policies on like visitors. So like I know some schools are like not allowing people, but some schools pretty soon they're going to allow visitors to go into classroom. But we usually use the same set of workshops every year. So if you make a workshop that's virtual, could it be transferred to do like in person?
Totally. Yes. And I think that vice versa too. You could have an in-person workshop that you transferred to virtual. Some of my teammates did that too. I would think that, Megan, the difference is going to be maybe how you do some of the activities, and how you maybe, you know, do the applications piece of it. But absolutely, I would say if you already have a workshop prepared and maybe you've written one or you have a past one, use it. Definitely. Just use what we learned tonight to kind of make some little tweaks to it so that it fits in this virtual world we live in. Great question. Faith, did you have your hand up? Yeah. Faith, did you have a question? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just like got kicked out, and when I came back in, everyone was silent.
No.
So
You're totally good.
yeah. So I know, like in Louisiana, when we do like if we do like the personal thing,
Mhm.
sometimes students. This is probably a thing everywhere. Sometimes students like won't answer, and it's easier to gauge that like face to face because you can kind of say like someone wearing this colored shirt. So like, how do we do that via Zoom? Like, how do we keep them engaged, especially like because you don't want to force a student to share something personal.
If they don't want to like unmute themselves and talk. Is that what you're kind of getting at, Faith? I think she froze, but I think that's, yeah. Okay, awesome. So the way that I have overcome that is a couple different ways. Probably safest option is to use the chat. So say you ask a question, no one responds to it, and it's awkward. That's all right. Throw it to the chat and have students answer in the chat, because a lot of times they feel more comfortable with that. The best thing about the chat is that by students putting something in the chat, that gives you permission to highlight that student. So we always want to celebrate our students, but sometimes they don't want to unmute. So say we did this in the chat and then Corley had an awesome example. I could say, yeah, Corley, I love what you just said in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing that. That helps highlight that student and bring that student up, and give them praise for what they contributed to. One method that I go to, students might hate me for it, but that's all right, is to also call on people sometimes. If I have a relationship with a student, like I knew Caleb because he was in one of my workshops, I might call on Caleb because I know, that we have at least somewhat of a relationship more than some of us do. Another way this appears though for me is that I will a lot of times ask students to repeat direction sets and they don't know I'm going to. So I'll deliver a direction set for what we're going to do and then be like, all right, Bryson, what are we about to do? And then he's like, oh crap, I wasn't listening. But that's okay because then we can talk about it again. But that helps students know that I am going to call on people if I need to. I would never call on someone for like a personal type question. It would be more like a direction set or like what was difficult, what was easy. If it's more personal, I would lean on the side of the chat, but if it's too personal, I would do an independent journal and not have them share. So couple ways, but you can always call on people and they might get mad, but it works. I also do awkward dances and like be all awkward. I'm like, awkward Zoom silence. I will sit here until someone answers. And then they're like, well, I don't want to watch your dance for 15 minutes, so I'm going to say something. That works too. Great question. What else?
You.
Bryson.
All right. So we all know people are more bold virtually than they are in person. So like me and Caleb was on an Instagram live, and it was actually a really good it was actually a really good setup we had going. We're doing a Q&A with us two, and we had some, I would call them trolls,
Yeah.
get on the live and just start bashing us, disrespectful. I'm a sucker for vulnerability when it comes to facilitating, but not someone in the audience disrespecting. Yeah. So we just ended the live altogether, but I really wish we could have kept doing it. But like, what is some advice like to bounce back from that disrespect?
Yeah, that's such an awkward situation. I would say live is one that's really, really tricky to control in the moment. I know for our team, we've been very mindful of the platforms even we go live on anymore. So if you notice, like we did our Q&A, but we used our national FFA like officer pages and not our personal pages and not national FFA, because we thought that would be a safer option, which it ultimately was. So I would say, first of all, be mindful of it. I'm assuming you all used your officer accounts though, right? Yeah, because I know you have them. And so the advice I have is if that happens on live, I think depending on the comment, you can end the live, definitely. I think that you can not acknowledge the comment, but if it's really bad, like you don't want to do that necessarily. And so I would say with live, what I would do is ask your state staff what to do ahead of time. Our safety feature for us as national officers is to have someone that has control over our pages moderating the live videos. And so they have the ability to delete chats and delete comments if they get really, really bad while we're doing a live. So live is really hard. On Zoom, what I would suggest is that you can always redirect the conversation. And so the way I redirect is even if students like don't say anything bad, they're just kind of off topic, I'll be like, all right, y'all, like love this conversation. But again, like, let's talk about how we contributed as a team, like bring it back. And as a facilitator, redirect the conversation, redirect. If it gets to the point where someone's just like going off about something, I think you can always private message them and be like, hey, like, love this enthusiasm, but like, can we talk off screen or something like that? I would say, Bryson, like the biggest thing is there's not like a silver bullet answer for you for this question. You're going to have more experience under your belt as a facilitator to know what's appropriate to do and what's not appropriate to do. My response whenever I have these type of situations is to always think about students first. So if a comment is impacting student safety, is impacting people feeling welcome in your workshop or on your live, if it's negatively impacting that student experience, that's when we need to step up and try to take some control over it. If it's more of like an off-topic kind of conversation and it's just some goofy story, it's not as serious to help redirect. So student safety, student experience always comes first, but I wish I could give you a like one trick solution. I would have this conversation with state staff also because it's going to happen. And we live in a very heated world, in a world with a lot of opinions. So have that conversation as a team too and figure out how you can support each other through it. Great question. Other questions we have? All right, well, we have about 9 minutes, so what I'm going to do is head back over to my PowerPoint and see if we covered all of the questions I had prepared ahead of time. They're just like our frequently asked questions. If you think of anything, please interrupt. Okay, Okay. Questions. How long should a workshop be for a student's attention span? What a wonderful question. Thank you so much for asking. This is kind of up to you. As students, how long y'all think would be like too long for a workshop? What do you think?
Too long would probably be like an hour and a half.
Hour and a half? Good thought.
I have the attention span of like a beta fish. So like I can pay attention for about 45 minutes, but then I'm like,
yeah,
twitching.
Yep. Lee, did you have something?
Okay, so our schools and a lot of schools in Alabama are set up on the block system.
Yep.
And the block system are hour and a half classes, especially at my school.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen officers do it, but
yeah,
how would you successfully space out something over Zoom?
Yes.
So you fill an hour and a half time frame.
Yes, great question. So no like perfect answer to this. Typically when we're running virtual workshops, we aim for about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. Like Lee said though, we might be facilitating for some schools that have an hour and a half. What I would say with that is that we can have time at the end for questions, for like, you know, get to know you type stuff. Biggest thing for y'all, ag teachers want to see it purposeful, right? They don't want you to be like, okay, peace. Like I was here for 45 minutes. We have an hour and a half. We're just going to chill for 45 minutes. Probably not the best option for you as a state officer. So what I would suggest is to keep students' attention span. We want to keep them active and engaged as much as we can. The way I would do this, I had an hour and 15-minute workshop. I knew a lot of students weren't going to sit at their computer for an hour and 15 minutes. So one of our activities, we literally ran around the room that we were in and filled a grocery bag full of stuff. So have students go like physically get up and do something and do that. Another thing could be, instead of raising your hand, you jump out of your seat, or you stand up to vote yes, you sit down to vote no. So our world that we have is this screen, but we can still have students physically moving and engaging. And that's what I always said. Yeah, Lee, you look like you're having a little dance party right now, and I like it. So I'm a big dance party person too. People aren't concentrating. It's okay. 5-second dance party. Put on some, whatever the kids listen to these days, and dance to it for 5 seconds. That's okay. So I would say if you have an hour and a half to fill, try to find some ways to physically engage, have some callbacks, and you'll be good. Great question. Next question, is it possible to pre-record workshops but still have an element of live processing? What advice would you have on pre-recorded workshops in general? What a wonderful question. Here's the deal. I have never done a pre-recorded workshop. All of mine have been live, and actually, fun fact, National FA is leaning more towards live. So we are doing visits next week, but we're not even having pre-recorded as an option. It's like live or not a workshop, because it's just so different to do a workshop live than pre-recorded. What I would say is, if you are doing a pre-recorded workshop, what happens, and what my teammates have found to be successful, is they will still do everything but say, okay, pause the video, so they can like actually do the activity, and then they'll come back. Or be like, we have 5 minutes to journal about this question, pause the video after 5 minutes, unpause the video, and then you have that answer. So you can always walk them through some questions and say pause, do a little Dora the Explorer and be like, what do you think? Here's what the answer is, you know, so you can still do it. But I would say if you have the ability to do live. Pre-recording is not terrible though. What type of topics do members want to sign up for? What are the best times to host these? One thing that I have found helpful, y'all may or may not have seen on my Instagram a couple times, is I am a big fan of asking students what they want, because I think students know what they want more than I know what they do. And so I'll do this on my Instagram story and have them answer questions about what they want. A lot of our students right now, just from Instagram, I can tell you want TikToks, they want workshops, and they want some type of way to engage and meet people. And so do your workshops, but also if you have the ability as a team to do like a live thing like Bryson and Caleb just did, do a fun night. I've hosted a murder mystery with one of my teammates. There's the ability to do that, do some TikTok challenges, but biggest takeaway, ask students what they want because they will tell you, and then you can serve those students the best. How do we keep members engaged and involved online? We kind of talked about that. I'm a big fan of engage the body, keep them active, keep them also knowing that you are going to hold them accountable. Again, I'll ask students to summarize directions all the time, and it may catch them off guard. But one thing I found too is that if you ask students to have their video on, that's very, very helpful as a facilitator. If someone's video is off, you kind of don't know what they're doing. Sometimes students are required to do that, and that's okay, but I always ask students to turn their video on if they're comfortable at the beginning of a workshop. That helps you measure engagement. How can students do online worksheets? Y'all saw that at Summit. You can do QR codes. You can email ahead of time. You can have them, you can put a link in the chat for a worksheet, so you can still do it. Any other last minute questions that have come into our minds at this point?
Okay, Tess. So something that we're going to have to go with, or something that I've talked about with the advisors, is like, I will be zooming only his computer, and it'll kind of like be up on his smart board.
Yeah. Yep.
So, like, how do you feel about, like, what advice do you have about that?
Yeah, that is a great question. I actually did the first one of that a couple weeks ago. It is kind of awkward because you can't really see students super well, and I can't tell like what students are talking when they do. And so one thing that I did that worked really well, if you're doing a small group, I'm trying to find it in my notebook because I can show y'all kind of like a pro insider tip to it. Okay, cool. Here is the sheet that I used for this chapter officer team. There they are. They're precious. Okay. What I did is I had them lined up. They were lined up on a desk, and I wrote their names based on the seat they were in. And then I was able to call on people based on the seat because I could see the seat. So I could say, okay, second seat in is Cam, but I couldn't see Cam's face. Like, I don't know what Cam actually looks like to like call on him because I want to use student names. So if you only have a couple students, pro tip is to do that. Otherwise, you're going to feel awkward because you're going to be on the big screen, but it's kind of the same as virtual facilitation. You just won't be able to do some activities. So like the whiteboard, for example, if not all of your students have the ability to have their own device, you can't have them all contribute to the whiteboard. So just be mindful of that, but it just feels a little bit more awkward, but you still are very impactful as a facilitator. Great question. Any other last minute questions, y'all? In the last
Okay,
like
I have
1
a
minute?
question.
Yeah.
But it's not related to everything you talked about. Can we get a picture like at the end before you
I
go?
really do want to get a picture. Great question, Caleb. Y'all, you want to take a picture of this? You can. This is my contact information. You can also find me on social media. I am here for you. I am in your corner always, even after October. If you need someone to bounce ideas off of, talk through a workshop with, I am your girl. I can do that, or any of my teammates will too. And then the other email is State Officer Programs Team. They are phenomenal people. Y'all saw them at Summit. They are here to help as well. So I am going to stop sharing my slide. Okay. Cool. And if y'all are comfortable, let's go ahead and put on our cameras so we can grab a picture. I'm going to grab my phone. Okay. Very cool. Okay. Do we want to smile? Do we want to do something fun? What do you think? Funny face?
Let's smile first.
All right, cool.
And then we can
do something. Okay, let's smile first. If y'all want a smile picture, ready? 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. We all get it? Okay, now let's do a fun one. Do your favorite dance move. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Love it, y'all. Very cool. Thank y'all so much for having me tonight. I hope you enjoyed it, and please let me know how I can help you too as you begin this virtual facilitation journey. I'm going to turn it back over to some state staff for final instructions.